Sir, stand up and show me your ID, now.
Officer, I'm sitting on a public bench. My hands are visible. I'm not committing a crime.
You're loitering and refusing a lawful order. Last chance.
You're violating the Constitution you swore to uphold. Step back.
Stand up or you're going in cuffs.
And your body camera...
The voice was sharp, nasal, and dripping with an unearned authority that shattered the peaceful morning air. It belonged to Officer Kyle Braden, a 27-year-old patrolman with a high and tight haircut that couldn't hide the impatience on his flushed face. He stood on the concrete walkway of the United States Post Office, his hand resting ominously near the grip of his service weapon, his posture aggressive, leaning forward like a coiled spring ready to snap. The man he was barking at sat perfectly still on the wrought iron bench bolted to the pavement. Elias Thorne did not flinch. He did not scramble to obey. He did not look like a threat. He looked like exactly what he was, a 68-year-old man wearing a faded olive-drab field jacket over a button-down shirt, resting a polished hickory cane against his knee. His skin was the color of deep mahogany, weathered by decades of sun and wind. He breathed in slowly, the morning air filling his lungs, and exhaled with a deliberate calmness that seemed to infuriate the young officer even more. "Officer!" Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried the weight of command. "I am sitting on a public bench. I am not obstructing the sidewalk. My hands are visible. I am resting my leg. I have no obligation to show you my papers simply because you demand them." "You're loitering," Braden snapped, taking a step closer, invading Elias's personal space. "And now you're refusing a lawful order. You want to go to jail today, old man? Is that how you want this Tuesday to end?" Elias looked up, then his eyes dark and piercing. They were eyes that had seen the jungle canopy of Vietnam, eyes that had witnessed the fall of friends and the horror of combat. They were not eyes that were easily intimidated by a man whose uniform still looked stiff from the dry cleaners. "Son," Elias said softly, "you are making a mistake. A very expensive, very permanent mistake. I suggest you take a breath, step back, and think about the Constitution you swore an oath to uphold, because right now you are about to cross a line you cannot uncross. But before we unravel the catastrophic chain of events that is about to destroy Officer Braden's career and cost the city millions, I need you to do something. If you believe that our veterans deserve respect and that police officers must obey the law, hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Are you in Texas? Florida, New York? Let me know. You need to see how this ends because what happens in the next 10 minutes is going to leave you absolutely stunned." Officer Braden didn't know who he was talking to. To him, Elias Thorne was just another vagrant in a town that was trying to clean up its image. Braden had been on the force for 4 years, and he had developed a reputation for being proactive, which was a polite way of saying he stopped anyone who didn't look like they belonged in the affluent downtown district. The call had come in 10 minutes earlier. A suspicious person report. The caller, a new manager at the boutique shop across the street, had reported a black male, disheveled, loitering near the post office entrance, possibly casing vehicles. There was no casing of vehicles. There was no suspicious behavior. Elias Thorne had walked 3 blocks from his bungalow, a home he had owned since 1984, to mail a care package to the widow of his platoon sergeant. The package contained a handwritten letter and a small check to help her with heating bills. The walk had flared up the old shrapnel injury in his right hip, a souvenir from a mortar attack in 1968. He had sat down on the bench to let the pain subside before making the trek home. He had been sitting there for exactly 7 minutes when Officer Braden's cruiser screeched to a halt at the curb. "I don't care about your suggestions." Braden sneered, his thumb unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. "I have a report of a suspicious individual matching your description casing cars. That gives me reasonable suspicion. Now for the last time, ID, or you're going in cuffs." Elias kept his hands open on his knees. He didn't move for his wallet. He knew the law better than the man standing over him. He knew that Terry versus Ohio required more than a vague hunch or an anonymous phone call. It required specific, articulable facts. and sitting on a bench in broad daylight was not a fact of a crime. "I am not casing cars," Elias said, his voice steady. "I just mailed a package. I am resting. That is not a crime. Unless you can articulate a specific crime I am suspected of committing, I am not required to identify myself. This is a consensual encounter, and I am choosing not to engage." Braden's face turned a shade of crimson. He wasn't used to people talking back. He certainly wasn't used to old black men in worn-out jackets quoting case law. He looked around. The morning foot traffic was picking up. People were stopping. A woman in a business suit paused near the mailbox. A young man with a backpack stopped near the corner. Braden felt the pressure of the audience. He couldn't back down now. If he walked away, he'd look weak. He'd look like he lost control. "You're detained," Braden declared, his voice rising. "You are detained for obstruction of a police investigation and loitering. Stand up, now." "I cannot stand up quickly," Elias said. "I am disabled, and you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." "I'm going to help you up then," Braden growled. He lunged forward. The moment Officer Braden's hand grabbed the lapel of Elias's field jacket, the dynamic of the universe shifted, though Braden was too blind to see it. He wasn't just grabbing a jacket, he was grabbing a piece of history. That jacket had been worn in protests for civil rights. It had been worn at veteran remembrance ceremonies. It covered a heart that had pumped fearlessly while under enemy fire when Braden's father was still in diapers. "Get your hands off me," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "I am a United States Marine. You are assaulting a disabled veteran. I'm arresting a suspect who is resisting," Braden shouted, playing to the crowd, trying to justify the violence he was initiating. He yanked Elias forward. Elias grimaced as pain shot through his hip, but he didn't strike back. He knew that any movement could be interpreted as reaching or fighting. And he knew that Braden was looking for an excuse to use the taser on his belt, or worse. Elias used his cane to brace himself, trying to rise with dignity. "Drop the weapon," Braden screamed, pointing at the cane. "It's a cane, you idiot," a voice rang out from the sidewalk. It was the woman in the business suit. She had her phone out now, the lens trained steadily on the officer. "He's an old man with a cane. What are you doing?" Braden ignored her. He slapped the cane out of Elias's hand. The hickory stick clattered onto the concrete. Without the support, Elias's leg buckled. He stumbled, catching himself on the arm of the bench. "Stop resisting!" Braden roared, moving in behind Elias. He grabbed Elias's left arm and wrenched it behind his back with excessive force. "My shoulder!" Elias gasped, the first sign of vulnerability he had shown. "I have metal in that shoulder. You are tearing the joint. You should have thought of that before you disobeyed a direct order." Braden panted, shoving Elias's face against the brick wall of the post office. The cold, rough brick scraped against Elias's cheek. The indignity of it burned hotter than the physical pain. Braden kicked Elias's legs apart, forcing him into a search position. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. Click, click. The steel ratcheted tight against Elias's wrists. "You are under arrest." Braden recited the adrenaline, making his voice shake slightly. "You have the right to remain silent." Elias closed his eyes for a brief second, mastering the pain in his shoulder and hip. When he opened them, he turned his head as far as he could to look at Braden. "I know my rights," Elias said. "And I know yours. I hope you enjoyed this feeling of power, officer, because it is the last time you will ever feel it." Braden scoffed, shoving Elias toward the patrol car. Yeah. Tell it to the judge." "Oh, I will," Elias murmured. "I most certainly will." The crowd was larger now. Phones were recording from every angle. The young man with the backpack was shouting, asking for badge numbers. The woman in the suit was narrating the scene for her recording, describing the brutality she had just witnessed. Braden shoved Elias into the back of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat was unforgiving on Elias's injured hip. He had to twist his body awkwardly to fit his legs in without his cane, which Braden had tossed carelessly into the front passenger footwell. As Braden slammed the door, sealing Elias inside the cage, a heavy silence seemed to fall over the interior of the car. Elias sat there, the handcuffs digging into his wrists. He didn't panic, he didn't cry out. He began to inventory the events in his mind, organizing them like a mission report. Time of contact, 10:14 a.m. Officer name, Braden. Cause for stop. None provided other than vague suspicion. Force used excessive. Kick to the cane. Torque on a known injury. Witnesses. At least 4 recording. Elias took a deep breath. He wasn't just a victim now. He was a soldier on a new battlefield. And he was about to flank the enemy. The ride to the station was short, less than 15 minutes. Braden drove with aggressive, jerky movements, muttering to himself, rehearsing the narrative he would write in his report. He had to make it sound like Elias was threatening. Suspect assumed a bladed stance. Suspect brandished a wooden club. He was already writing the fiction in his head. They arrived at the precinct. Braden hauled Elias out of the car, parading him through the back entrance like a trophy hunter. They walked into the processing area, the smell of stale coffee and floor wax greeting them. Sitting at the booking desk was Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 55, a 25-year veteran of the force. He had thick glasses and the tired demeanor of a man who was counting the days until his pension. He looked up as Braden wrestled Elias toward the holding bench. Miller's eyes went from Braden to Elias. He saw the field jacket. He saw the gray hair. He saw the way Elias carried himself, even in cuffs. "What do we have here, Braden?" Miller asked, his voice skeptical. "Disorderly obstruction resisting," Braden listed, dumping Elias's personal effects onto the counter. "Guy was loitering at the post office, refused ID, got aggressive." Miller sighed. He pulled on a pair of blue latex gloves and picked up Elias's wallet. It was an old leather bifold, worn smooth with age. "Name?" Miller asked, looking at Elias. "Elias Marcus Thorne," Elias stated clearly. Miller paused. The name triggered a faint memory, something from the local papers years ago, or maybe a community event. He opened the wallet. The first thing he saw was the driver's license. Valid. Address in the historic district, a nice neighborhood. Miller flipped the flap of the wallet. Behind a clear plastic window was a card that wasn't a standard civilian ID. It was a Department of Defense retired identification card. Next to it was a folded, laminated card, the kind veterans carry to show their VA priority status. But it was the small, tarnished metal card tucked behind the license that made Miller's blood run cold. It was a membership card for the Military Order of the Purple Heart. Miller looked closer at the papers Braden had dumped. There was a folded copy of a DD-214 reduced in size and laminated. Elias carried it because he had needed it for a VA appointment earlier that week. Miller read the lines on the document. Rank, Master Sergeant, USMC retired. Awards Purple Heart, Second Award, Silver Star, Navy Cross. Miller stopped breathing for a second. He looked up at Elias. Then he looked at Braden, who was casually pouring himself a cup of water from the cooler, completely oblivious to the nuclear bomb that was ticking on the counter. "Braden," Miller said. His voice was very quiet. "Yeah, Sarge. Did you read this man's ID?" "Didn't have to. He refused to show it. That's why he's here." Miller closed his eyes. He felt a headache forming right behind his eyes. He looked at Elias Thorne, a man who had earned the Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor in combat, and was now sitting handcuffed to a steel bench because a rookie cop didn't like his tone. "Take the cuffs off," Miller said. Braden turned around confused. "What, Sarge? He was resisting. He's being processed." "I said—" Miller stood up, his voice rising to a roar that echoed off the cinder-block walls. "Take the damn cuffs off him right now!" The room went silent. 2 other officers in the corner stopped typing. Braden froze the water cup halfway to his mouth. Sarge, you can't just... Do you know who this is? Miller held up the DD-214. This is Master Sergeant Elias Thorne. He's a Silver Star and Navy Cross recipient. He's lived in this town for 40 years. He organizes the Memorial Day Parade every single year. Braden's face went pale. The arrogance began to crack. He didn't say that. He just said he was resting. He told you he was disabled, Miller accused. I see the cane right there. Did you verify his disability before you went hands-on? He was belligerent, Braden stammered. Elias spoke then from the bench. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. I told him I had a shrapnel injury in my shoulder. He twisted my arm anyway. I believe something tore. I will require medical attention, and I want a photographer to document the bruising before I am released. Miller looked at Braden with pure disgust. You idiot. You absolute idiot. Miller walked around the desk. He didn't wait for Braden. He pulled his own key out and unlocked Elias's cuffs. Mr. Thorne, Miller said, his tone apologetic, respectful. I am truly sorry. There's been a misunderstanding. Elias rubbed his wrists. He didn't smile. There is no misunderstanding, Sergeant. There is a crime. Assault under color of authority. False imprisonment. Deprivation of civil rights. The only misunderstanding is that Officer Braden thought he was above the law. I'm going to get the watch commander, Miller said nervously. Please just sit tight. Can I get you some water, coffee? I want my lawyer, Elias said. His name is David Ross. He's a former JAG officer. He's in my contacts. Miller nodded, swallowing hard. I'll make the call. Miller practically ran to the elevator. Braden stood there, isolated, the reality of his situation crashing down on him. He looked at Elias. I didn't know, Braden whispered almost to himself. Elias looked at him. That is the problem, son. You didn't care to know. You saw a black man on a bench and you saw a subject. You didn't see a citizen. You didn't see a human being. And now you're going to learn the price of that blindness. Upstairs in the glass-walled office of Captain Marcus Reynolds, the day was about to go from bad to catastrophic. Reynolds was the station commander, a man who prided himself on running a tight ship. When Sergeant Miller burst in winded and pale, Reynolds knew something was wrong. What is it, Miller? We have a code red downstairs. Captain Braden just brought in a prisoner. So Braden brings in 3 people a day. He brought in Elias Thorne. Reynolds dropped his pen. The Marine, the guy who runs the Veterans Center. Yes, sir. Braden arrested him for loitering at the post office. Went hands-on. Thorne claims injury to his bad shoulder. And Cap. It's bad. Thorne is cool as ice. He's asking for David Ross. Reynolds stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. David Ross, the civil rights attorney. The same. Pull the body cam, Reynolds barked. Now, before we say another word to anyone. They huddled around Reynolds' computer. Miller logged into the cloud server and pulled up Braden's feed. They watched in silence. They saw Elias sitting peacefully. They heard the reasonable refusal. They saw Braden escalate without cause. They saw the kick to the cane, a move so cruel and unnecessary that Reynolds winced. They heard the crunch of the shoulder being twisted. Jesus, Reynolds whispered. There's no probable cause. Not a shred. He's just sitting there. It gets worse, Miller said. Thorne says witnesses were recording. Reynolds rubbed his face with both hands. This was a nightmare. A racial profiling case involving a disabled war hero caught on tape with a lawyer who ate police departments for breakfast. Go downstairs, Reynolds ordered. Get Braden out of his sight. Put him in an interview room and take his gun. He's on administrative leave effective immediately. I'm going to talk to Thorne. Reynolds straightened his tie and went down to the holding area. He found Elias sitting on the bench massaging his shoulder. Mr. Thorne, Reynolds said, forcing a calm demeanor. I'm Captain Reynolds. I want to personally apologize for this." "Save it for the deposition, Captain," Elias said without looking up. "Sir, we can release you right now. No charges. We'll drive you home. We'll handle this internally." Elias looked up. "Release me?" "No. I am under arrest, am I not? I have been booked. My property was seized. You don't get to unarrest me just because you realized you stepped on a landmine. I want the full booking record. I want the mugshot taken. I want the paper trail." "Mr. Thorne, that's not necessary." "It is necessary." Elias's voice cracked like a whip. "Because if I walk out of here with a handshake, you will sweep this under the rug. You will give that boy a slap on the wrist and put him back on the street to do this to someone who doesn't have a Navy Cross, someone who can't fight back. No. You process me, you charge me, and then I will destroy you in court." Reynolds stared at the man. He realized then that he wasn't dealing with a suspect. He was dealing with a tactician. Elias Thorne was securing the perimeter, gathering his intel, and preparing for a total assault. "David Ross is in the lobby," the desk officer called out. Elias smiled a cold, grim smile. "Show him in." By Wednesday morning, the video titled "Police Assault 68-Year-Old Purple Heart Vet" had 4 million views on Twitter. The footage from Mrs. Higgins' phone was damning. It showed the bright sun, the peaceful street, and the sudden, unprovoked violence of Officer Braden kicking a cane away from a crippled man. The audio was crystal clear. "It's a cane, you idiot. I have metal in that shoulder." The public reaction was nuclear. The police station's phone lines jammed within an hour. Protesters began to gather outside the precinct, not just the usual activists, but veterans. Old men in VFW hats, bikers with Patriot Guard patches, young men who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan. They stood shoulder to shoulder with Black Lives Matter activists, a rare and powerful coalition, united by disgusted fury. Inside the station, the atmosphere was funereal. The internal affairs investigation, usually a slow process, was moving at light speed. They pulled Braden's file. What they found was a pattern. 6 previous complaints of rudeness, 3 complaints of escalation, all dismissed as unfounded by a supervisor who had since retired. But looking at the data now, the pattern was undeniable. Braden stopped black men at a rate 4 times higher than the department average. He used force in 20% of his stops compared to the department average of 2%. Braden was sitting at home suspended, watching his life implode on the evening news. He saw the interview with Elias Thorne. Elias sat in his living room, his arm in a sling. He looked regal. "I fought for this country," Elias told the reporter. "I bled in a rice paddy in 1968 so that Americans could have freedom. Freedom to sit on a bench. Freedom to walk down the street without showing papers like we're in a police state. What that officer did was not just an attack on me. It was an attack on the Constitution." The lawsuit was filed on Friday. Thorne versus the City of Oak Creek et al. It alleged Fourth Amendment violations, excessive force assault battery, and violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The city attorney took one look at the complaint, then watched the body cam footage again. He called the mayor. "We have to settle," the attorney said. "If this goes to a jury, they will give him the keys to the city. They will bankrupt us." "Can we defend any of it?" the mayor asked. "No, it's indefensible. Braden had no reasonable suspicion. The suspicious person call was based on bias, and Braden acted on it without independent verification. He kicked a cane out from under a disabled man. It's a disaster." But Elias wasn't interested in a quick payoff. When the city offered $500,000 to make it go away, his lawyer, David Ross, laughed. "Mr. Thorne isn't doing this for a vacation home," Ross told the city lawyers. "He wants policy changes. He wants Braden fired and decertified so he can never wear a badge again in any state, and he wants an admission of wrongdoing." The negotiations dragged on for 3 months. The Department of Justice announced they were opening a pattern or practice investigation into the Oak Creek Police Department. That was the final straw for the city. They needed to stop the bleeding. The settlement was finalized on a rainy Tuesday exactly 6 months after the arrest. The terms were historic. $3.5 million. Officer Kyle Braden was terminated for cause, and the department petitioned the state licensing board to revoke his certification permanently. The department agreed to implement a new duty to intervene policy, requiring officers to stop their partners if they see excessive force. And perhaps most painfully for the department, the chief of police had to issue a public televised apology to Elias Thorne. Elias stood on the steps of City Hall as the news broke. He didn't look happy. He looked tired. "Justice was served today," Elias told the crowd. "But justice is expensive. It cost me my peace of mind. It cost the taxpayers millions. All because one man couldn't check his ego. All because one man saw a skin color instead of a citizen." Officer Braden never worked in law enforcement again. The video of him kicking the cane followed him everywhere. He applied for security jobs, but a simple Google search of his name made him unhireable. He eventually moved 2 states away, working in a warehouse forever, the man who assaulted a war hero. But the story doesn't end with the money. Elias Thorne took the $3.5 million check. He didn't buy a new car. He didn't buy a mansion. He bought the old abandoned brick building next to the post office, the very building he had been sitting in front of. He hired contractors. He spent the next year renovating it. He opened the Thorne Veteran Support Center. It was a place where veterans could come for legal aid for help with VA claims, or just to sit and have a cup of coffee without being harassed. 1 year after the incident, Elias returned to that wrought iron bench. It was a sunny Tuesday, just like the day of the arrest. He sat down. He rested his new cane, a gift from a custom woodworker who had seen the video, against his knee. He watched the street. A police cruiser drove by. The officer inside, a young woman, slowed down. She looked at Elias. She waved respectfully. Elias nodded back. He closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the town. He wasn't just an old man on a bench anymore. He was a guardian. He had held the line one last time. The system is flawed. It is broken in places, rusted in others. But on that day, because one man refused to bow down, because one man knew his rights and had the courage to suffer for them, the gears turned. It forces us to ask ourselves, if Elias Thorne hadn't been a war hero, if he hadn't had the resources and the knowledge, what would have happened? How many others are sitting in cells right now because they didn't have a Purple Heart to shield them? Elias Thorne's victory is a beacon, but it is also a warning. Freedom is not free. It is rented, and the rent is due every day. Sometimes you pay it in a jungle in Vietnam, and sometimes you pay it on a sidewalk in your own hometown simply by having the courage to say no. This story reminds us that authority without accountability is tyranny. It reminds us that every citizen has the power to stand their ground when the law is on their side. What do you think? Was the settlement enough? Should Officer Braden have faced criminal charges, not just termination? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one. And if you believe in holding power accountable, if you believe in the Constitution, please subscribe to the channel. We are building a community of people who refuse to look away. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay informed, and know your rights. Chi.